where are we going today? Genesis 21. So we're working our way through Genesis. But before we get to this, I want to ask you a question this morning. And this is my question. And I usually ask a question, and sometimes it's a question that's kind of an easy question to answer, or it might be something that you can just quickly skim over. This isn't one I want you to do that on. I want you to actually think about this. And if you had a bit of paper, I'd actually like, not that I'm asking you to do it, but it's one of those things I'd really like you to, I thought about this and thought it'd be good if people just got a bit of paper out and wrote it down. Like, what is this thing? What's the one thing you long for but you don't ever think will happen? Now, I'm not talking about silly things like you wish you could fly or wish you were 40 again. Those things are impossible. But I'm talking about things that are possible. Things that you long for but don't think will ever happen. So here's some examples of some things that might resonate with you. I wish my daughter and her husband reconciled with each other. I wish my son would speak to his brother again. I wish I could have all my children around the same Christmas table again. I wish my daughter would forgive me for something that I did 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 10. I wish my daughter would even tell me what it is that I did that causes her not to speak to me. I wish my son would start talking to me again. I wish my daughter would stop dating the wrong men. I wish my son would stop drinking and clean his life up. I wish my children would come back to church. I wish there could be peace in my family. I wish that legal matter would finally be resolved. I wish my marriage could be like it was when we first got married. Now, even in saying these things, I feel a sense of emotion myself, because some of these things are things that are very deeply emotional for us. These are things that we really feel. And I know some of your stories, and I know some of the things there resonate with some of you. They certainly do with me, and I'll mention that a bit later on. So those things are on a personal level. They're the things that you would love or long to see happen, but in your mind, you actually don't believe they ever will. You just can't see it. As much as you'd want it to happen, you actually can't see it ever would. But moving away from the emotion, personal, perhaps something like, I'd love to see a church full of young families again. Like, wouldn't that be beautiful to just see, like, I long for that. I would long to see young families in here and kids and all the noise and all the excitement that goes on with that. I would love to see that. And I would love to see God do something extraordinary in my lifetime. Extraordinary. And perhaps if there were younger people in here, perhaps I wish I could have a child. For those who can't have children, maybe that's what's on their heart. Well, let's have a look at this story. Now, the last couple of weeks I've used some TV analogies to try and explain what I'm talking about. So if we went back to chapter 16, when we're talking about the incident where Sarah says to Abraham, hey, I've got a great idea. Why don't you go and sleep with our servant Hagar? And I said it was like that Jurassic Park movie that is just such a frustrating movie because there's that computer guy who's mucking it up. And you're just like, stop, you're mucking the whole thing up. And it's that sort of emotion in that story. And then last week was a bit like the bad reruns, and I mentioned a few bad reruns. And I'm sorry the Brady Bunch was in there, but that's what Google told me is one of the bad reruns. And that's what last week was like, because it was like, oh no, here we go again. Abraham's given his wife away again. It's a repeat of a terrible show. Well, today is that TV series that there's been this backstory for season on season on season, and it finally comes to the end. And what you've been hoping would happen the whole time finally comes together in the last episode. And I couldn't help thinking about the TV show called Friends. For some of you that this wasn't a show that you watched, I confess back in the 90s I did watch this show. It is a very funny show. And it went for 10 seasons. It started in 94. And there's a backstory in this whole show. For those of you who don't know the show, there's 3 guys, 3 girls who live in New York. They're in their 20s and then in their 30s as the show goes on, and they're young and happy and cool and good looking, and they're all living their lives in this fun place in New York. But there's a backstory because there's 2 people in the show. There's Ross and Rachel. And they went to school together, but at school he was a nerd and she was one of the cool kids. But he's always liked her. Now throughout the whole show, for all of these seasons, there's this constant tension between these 2, and they get together, then they don't. Then Ross goes off and marries somebody and that doesn't work and he's single again. And then I think it's season 8, and I had to look this up because I really had forgotten this. Season 8, they actually got together for one night and they had a baby. That was season 8, but then they still didn't get together. And there's this whole time working through this series, they're like, oh, come on, Ross and Rachel, when are you going to get together? You know you're right for each other. And there's this famous quote that one of the women says in there, Phoebe, she says, you're each other's lobster. Because apparently when lobsters have a mate for life, they stay together. I don't know if that's true, but that's what she says in the show. And she's like, you 2 are made for each other. Now, in the very final episode of the final season, they get together. She gets on a plane and the plane's about to take off and she goes, no, wait, I've got to get off. And she gets off the plane and she comes back and they hug and that's the end, right? So that's the final show. And it feels like that's how it was always supposed to end. And I don't know when people write TV series if they actually know how it's going to end when they start. I've never known that. Or that they just make it up as it goes along. I'm not sure. But it felt like that's how it was supposed to end. Well, that's what this episode here is like in this story. This is the final episode of the final series. And it's a happy ending. It finally ended how we thought it was going to. Over all those years, over those 25 years. But it's been a long time coming. So how do we get here? Because I want us to understand the emotional struggle this has been, the emotional wave this whole story has been with the highs and the lows. So I just want to do a little recap, and this will allow us to look at the backstory. Because there is a backstory here. The backstory is that Sarah's supposed to have a baby. That's the backstory. But it's a 25-year story. And as we work our way through this story, I want to point out the emotions, the highs and the lows of this story as if it was a TV show. So it starts off in chapters 12. That's where this whole series starts. The series is The God Who Calls, and it goes from Genesis 12 through to 36. So the very start of this is when God comes to Abraham and says, Abraham, I'm making you a promise. You are going to be the father of many nations. He was 75, his wife was 65. It seems unbelievable, but that's the promise that he gave. And it was like all of a sudden what was impossible perhaps was going to be possible. Because God has come along and said, this is what's going to happen. So the impossible becomes possible. So it starts off with a great deal of hope. You think, oh good, this is going to be a nice story. This old couple's going to have a baby. This looks like it's going to be a nice story. But it doesn't stay like that way for very long, because in the same chapter, in chapter 12, Abram famously gives his wife away to Pharaoh. In the same chapter. Just after God had said, I'm going to have children through you and you're going to be a great nation. Straight up, he just gives his wife away. And you think, oh well, there's no hope. That's the end of that story. It's gone, because remember, pharaohs don't give wives back. They don't give women back. But then the story goes on, and then the hope is restored because Pharaoh gives Sarai back. You go, oh, okay, and maybe this story will happen. Maybe there's still hope. And then it goes on again. The promise is repeated. God comes in chapter 13 and repeats the promise. And he says, you will have as many descendants as there is dust of the earth. That's a lot. So you think, okay, good. Now the hope is increased. You think, okay, yep, this is going to work. And then Abraham questions God and he says, but hang on a second, I don't actually have any children. You keep saying this, God, but I don't have any children. I've got this servant, Eliezer. Maybe he can be the person. So he's doubting. You think, oh, okay, well, maybe the hope's gone again. Maybe it's not going to work. And then you see the ups and downs of this story? Then the promise is confirmed in chapter 15. God comes again and says, God specifically promises that his own offspring will be his heir and his descendants will be numerous as the stars. Now it's gone from dust on the earth to stars in the sky. Hope is restored. You go, okay, God has confirmed the promise. Keeps going on. Sarai gives Hagar to Abram. You go, oh, okay, well that's just ruined the whole thing. It's not going to happen. It's over. That's the end. There's no hope. The hope's gone again. And then Ishmael is born, and that's no good either, because how's that even going to work? Ishmael isn't. It was supposed to be some sort of surrogacy deal where Hagar has a child and Sarah basically adopts that child, but that didn't work. So it's not going to work. So the hope's gone again. And then you go, oh, okay. So then God comes to Abraham in chapter 17 and promises, actually for the first time, specifically says that Sarah is going to have a son. That's the first time in chapter 17 it's actually been promised. So you think, oh, okay, we're okay. Hope's restored. It's good. This is going to end well again. And then, but Abraham still doubts. He actually laughs and says, yeah, okay, God, you've been saying this for 25 years. I'm 100 now. I'm 100. And my wife's 90. Surely Ishmael can be the one that's going to be the chosen one. Well, not really much hope there. And then God comes again in chapter 18. Again, God confirms Sarah's pregnancy and says, this time next year, Sarah will have a child. That was gone from she will have a child. It's gone from you will have descendants to actually your wife Sarah is going to have a child to this time next year. Specifically, this is rock solid, ironclad. So you think hope's restored, and you think that's probably the end of the story. Sarah hears this, she laughs, and you think, oh, well, she obviously doesn't believe it. Maybe there's no hope. And then, of course, we get to chapter 20, and then Abraham gives Sarah away again. Just after God has said, this time next year, she, your wife, will have a son. Straight after that, Abraham gives his wife away again, this time to Elimelech. And you think, okay, well, it's gone again. It's lost. There is going to be, because again, kings don't give wives back. So he's given his wife away. That's the end of the story. That's what you think. But then Elimelech gives Sarah back. And then if you look at this, and this is a little thing, the green is good and the red is bad, right? So you look at this story and you break it up over these 25 years, over all these chapters of all the highs and the lows. Oh, yeah, it's going to happen. Oh, no, it's not. Oh, yeah, it is. Oh, no, it's not. All these highs and lows of the emotions of all this story until we get to this chapter, and then it's finally the end. Just these two verses. The Lord kept his word and did for Sarah exactly what he had promised. She became pregnant and she gave birth to a son, Abraham, in his old age. After all of this time, after all of these starts and bad decisions and all the twists and turns, finally the promises happen. Finally, Sarah has had a child. Well, how does this make her feel? At the start, I asked you to write down something in your mind, write down something that you hope for but you don't ever believe would happen. This is something that's so deep for you. This is something that you just long for. That you would just, it's something too good for you to even allow yourself to imagine it could happen. It's that thing. Whatever that thing was that you look at and wonder if it could ever happen, you long for. I want you to try and imagine the emotion, if you can, if that thing happened. Imagine if you're in that situation where you're out of relationship with your children or whatever, or there's conflict in your family, or any one of those things that I suggested or you thought about. Try and imagine the emotion if that would happen. You would just, if you try and imagine it, and you probably don't allow yourself to because you don't want to get your hopes up about these things. But if you did, you would just, you would feel this sense of incredible happiness. Incredible. I mean, almost indescribable. And I think I would describe it as unspeakable joy. Because what's Sarah's response? And Sarah declared, God has brought me laughter. All who hear about this will laugh with me. What's her response? She laughs. This is a laugh of absolute joy. She has finally had a son. The only thing she's ever wanted. And for those that you hear these stories from time to time of people who have waited so long to have children and they finally have a child and they're just so happy and they're just so excited. Remember, it's not just that Sarah has had a child. It's not just that in our day and age, if you can't have a child and you have a child, it's a blessed thing. And that's a good thing. And parents are happy about that. But in this day and age, there's much more than that. It's that if you couldn't have children, you were considered cursed. So any mother who couldn't bear children was looked upon in their community as there was something wrong with them. Not physically. There was no understanding of that. They were considered cursed. You have obviously done something wrong. You are obviously a bad person because God or the gods have not allowed you to have a child. So you walked around with a sense of disgrace and shame. If you couldn't have children, you had that constant sense of shame and disgrace. That, oh, there's that person who can't have children. She's a bad person. She's obviously done something wrong. Also, it was your children that you relied on to look after you in your older age. There was no pension. There was no social security. There's no hospital system you can just go to and get free health. You relied on your children to take care of you in your old age. So not only does Sarah have a child, the very thing that she'd wanted, but now she's got rid of all of that shame and all of that disgrace and all that lack of security for the future. So she laughs. Unspeakable joy. So Sarah's response is intense happiness. That's why she laughs. But there's a funny connection between here and the name of their son, Isaac. Because if we go back to chapter 17, in verse 3, and Abraham names their son Isaac. Where did that name come from? In chapter 17, when God said to Abraham, he said, you are going to have a son, your wife is going to have a son, and you're going to name him Isaac. That was God's idea. God said to name him Isaac. Do you know what Isaac means? Isaac means laughter. Or he laughs, depending on how you look at it. It means laughter. Because God knew that when this child was going to be born, there was going to be great laughter of happiness. And it's kind of ironic because this idea of laughter has come up a few times in this story, if you were paying attention there. In chapter 17, Abraham laughs. Not happy laugh. He laughs like, oh, yeah, I'm 100 years old. Yeah, sure, God. Sure, God, I'm going to have a baby. Sure, at 100, I'm going to have a baby. Laughs. It's not the happy laugh, it's the laughing at, as does Sarah in 18. She laughs too. Oh, as if when I'm worn out, I'm going to have a baby. She laughs. But that's the mocking laugh. That's the disbelief laugh. This is the joyful laughter. God has brought me laughter, and others share the joy and laughter. Everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. So after all those years of worrying, doubting, all of the manipulation, all the things that they tried to do, are we going to have a baby? Are we not going to have a baby? Can we really trust God? I know that's what he said, but maybe he meant maybe we can have my servant, or maybe we'll try Ishmael, maybe we'll try all these things. After all of those years in meddling, she must have looked back and just thought, why didn't I just trust God? Like, for all of that worrying, for all of that effort, for all of that manipulation, that was always going to happen, it seemed that God was late. God wasn't late. That's what this message is called, when God seems late. They thought God was late. God was never late. Isaac was born exactly when he was supposed to be born. It's not like God made a promise to them and just fell asleep and forgot about it. This was always the plan. Sometimes God seems late, but that's not the case. It didn't work out in their timing, but it worked out in God's timing. So let me get back to this again. What is it for you that you need to trust God for? What is that one? There might be a couple of things, but that one thing in particular that you long for, and you just, in the natural, you just can't see it ever happening. Just like Sarah never thought she was going to have a child. That's obvious by the way she acted. At no stage did we get any indication she genuinely trusted God to keep him at his word and what he said. Hence she did all this other stuff. What do you need to trust God for? For me personally, you'll be aware that we're living down here, but we're still renting. Our house doesn't settle till mid-September. And I've told a few people this. There's a part of this, and I know Lisa's the same. There's a part of us that thinks the whole thing might just fall through. And if our sale falls out at the other end, that means we can't go on here. What are we going to do? Pack all our bags up and move again. Move to where? Has anyone got a spare house we can move into? I mean, there is still this sense of uncertainty. I want this to happen, but there's part of me that thinks, I don't know, is it going to? And yet, even in that, I need to go, okay, well, let's just say that the whole thing falls through. Does that mean God's plan hasn't worked and he's forgotten about us? No. That means it'll be something else. Something else that at this stage we don't know about. Now, I don't think it's going to come to that, but I wonder. We have some unsafe children, as many of you do. It's something that rarely leaves your conscience. Always there. You long for your children to come to know Jesus. You long for them to come back to what they were raised with, what in many cases they know to be true, but they just don't want to follow it. We have an ununified family. It's a constant weight on us, and it's difficult. And for those of you who have been through divorce, and some of you have, you will know what comes with divorce and remarriage is a whole bunch of baggage that comes that you have no control over. And it's something that we struggle with. It's something that we long to see unity in our family. And we pray that it will. One of those things was we long to see all of our children around the Christmas table together again. It's been a few years for us. And we long for that. And we pray for that. And we're trusting one day that will happen. But what is it for you? What is it for you that you need to trust God for? I know it's hard, isn't it? It's hard when you can fall into the trap of believing only what it is that you see with your eyes and only see what is now. And you look to the future and think things aren't going to change. That's what you think to yourself. Things are never going to change. This person's never going to change. This child's never going to change. That's what you think. That's why this is hard. And that's why trusting in God at times can be very difficult. And I want to give you two stories. These are two real-life stories about people who have trusted in God. And I'm sure there's many stories here too. These are just two stories that I think are worth considering. When we're talking about not being able to have children, there is a couple in England and the UK, Shane and Susan, we don't know their surnames. They waited 22 years to have a child. That's how long it took them to conceive a child. Apparently, they were known in the church as the couple trying to have kids. Do you know that couple? Oh, the couple. Oh, yeah, that couple is trying to have kids, that couple. Yeah, we know them. And when they were asked about this, they would say, look, The children are on order. We just haven't received them yet. That's actually what they said. Now, strangely enough, Susan, the mother-to-be, she had cancer just after the age of 40, and she had treatment for cancer. After the cancer, she fell pregnant. And it's an extraordinary story. This happened in 2010. It's an extraordinary story, and I'm going to come back to them in a minute. But then there's also George Mueller, which some of you will be familiar with. In 1844, he prayed for 5 people in particular that come to know Christ. 5 people. One became a Christian in 18 months. 1, 5 years. That seems like a long time. 1 in 6 years. And he prayed for another 32 years for those people before he died. And then we are told, quite a few years after that, the other 2 that weren't Christians at the time that he died, they became Christians, and they became Christians 52 years after George Mueller started praying for them. 52 years. It's a long time, isn't it? Well, that first Bible reading that Kerry read out, Romans 8, 24 to 25. But hope that is seen is not hope at all. You don't have to hope for what you have. You already have it. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. We wait for it patiently. Why can we wait patiently? Or why should we wait patiently? Or why is it that Paul says we can wait patiently? Because of this very well-known verse. And we know that in all things God works for the good for those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Now, it's very easy to read that verse, but it's very hard to live it. Very hard to live it. And we know that in all things, not some things, not many things, not a few things, all of those things that you'll think about and worry about, all of those things that God works for the good for those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Now let me finish with this. Getting back to this Susan and Shane, they had a few lessons that they learnt through this, and I'm going to give you the 3 lessons that they learnt. Remember, they waited 22 years for a child. The first lesson is, when you don't understand what is going on, get to your place of peace quickly. That is your secret place with God. In other words, if you don't know what's happening, you need to find a peace with God. You need to just constantly stop stressing it and just find that peace with God. That was their first idea. The second is, in some respects it's similar, don't waste time and effort on the questions you cannot answer or have not received an answer for. And I think this is very good advice, because we can spend so much time agonizing over things that we are never going to know the answer to. Never. We're just never going to know it. There's not really any point asking a question that you don't know that can't ever be answered. Not much point, I don't think. Or an answer that you have not received for. Just don't waste your time with that. We don't always get answers to things. And the third is, stay on this truth. God is trustworthy, and he has your best interests at heart. Our lives rest safely in his hands. God is never late. We might think God's late, but God is never late. What is it that you need to trust God for? You know, we look at this story of a woman who, honestly, didn't do very well in terms of trusting in God. I mean, we can look back in hindsight. It's easy for us to look back and say, like, Sarah, you were always going to have a baby. Didn't you know by the time we got to Genesis 21 you were going to have a baby? Didn't you know that? I know it took you 11 chapters to get there, but 9 chapters, she didn't know that. It's very easy to look at something in hindsight and look back and go, oh, why didn't I do this or why didn't I do that? And we can look at Sarah and go, you should have trusted God. You should have stopped trying to manipulate things and trust God. But she couldn't see it. She longed for it, but she couldn't see it. So what is it that you long for but you can't see? And I want you to not give up on that. Whatever that thing is, don't give up on it. It's not over yet. God's not late. We could only be halfway through the story. We might only be up to season 5 and there's still 5 more seasons to go. We don't know. We don't know what's next. But we know that we have a good, loving and faithful God. That's who we worship. And all things work together for good for those who trust him. All things. Even if we don't understand it, we probably won't understand it. But what is it that you need to really just press into and believe God for? And I want that you to commit to that. I want you to hold that and say, yep, I can't see it happening in the natural, but I'm just going to pray for it and believe it in the supernatural. Because God is the God of supernatural. If this story shows us anything, that a 90-year-old woman can have a baby, it shows us that. Let me pray. Father, we thank you for this passage this morning, for this story. We thank you that your promise in the end came to pass as it was always going to. Lord, there is so many times that we just want to give up. We lose hope. Help us not to lose hope. Help us to trust in you despite what we see in the natural. Lord, give us that faith to believe for those things that we long to happen. And we commit this to you in Jesus' name. Amen.